In this video, we'll be talking about Sirui's Aurora 35mm f1.4. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to give you my thoughts on Sirui's latest Aurora lens for the Fujifilm X mount, the 35mm f1.4. Now much like the 85mm f1.4 in the Aurora series, this lens is another mount converted full frame design that is necessarily large and looks that way, particularly on the smaller APS-C bodies that I'm using it on. Just like the 85mm, it's very well built and almost incredibly light for its size. But in the landscape where we have the XF 35mm f2, the XF 35mm f1.4, the XF 33mm f1.4, as well as third-party options like the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 Air, the Meiki 33mm f1.4, and all of these are dedicated APS-C designs, a lens of this size is really going to need to have some great party tricks to make it interesting for me, and that's what I hope to explore in this video. As always though, the disclaimer here is that Sirui did send this lens over for testing. They haven't asked for anything more than an honest review on this channel, and if you've seen my previous reviews of their Sniper and Aurora lenses, you know that I'm quite honest in my reviews, and all findings in this video will be absolutely no different. So let's jump in and see what it can do. As with the 85mm that I tested, this one is made out of lightweight composite materials, and Sirui does an absolutely excellent job with making the lens feel like it's worth every penny you spend on it. And on top of that, they've weather sealed all the possible points of ingress and claim that the lens is raindrop and dust resistant, for what that's worth. For me, I see this as a great peace of mind when I'm out in less than ideal environments. Now, there's an absolute bucket load of glass in this lens, including 7 special elements to help manage image quality, which we'll dissect a little bit more in some upcoming sections. However, what this means is that the lens weighs 490 grams in the Fujifilm mount. Now that's not light for an APS-C lens, but it's very good for a fast full-frame prime lens. Sirui also includes a large hood with this lens, and it has a lock, much like the ones we see on Fujifilm's GF lenses. Now, this will prevent the hood from getting knocked out of place or falling off in the field, and I love these locks on my GF lenses, but it does feel a little bit bulky on the smaller X series cameras to me. There are also several switches and a button on the lens as well. On the right-hand side of the barrel, we have the switch to declick the aperture ring, if that's the way that you like to work. And on the left-hand side, there's a cluster of 3. At the top, we have this lock switch, which can be used to lock your aperture ring into the auto position, or lock you out of it if you'd rather never go there. At the bottom, we have the AF/MF switch that I discussed in great detail in my 85mm video. It's quite redundant on the Fujifilm X mount. And then there's the function button, which of course can't be assigned on Fujifilm bodies, so it comes as an accessory. Overall, these are mostly just carryovers from the lens being available for several different systems. Autofocus on this lens is driven by Sirui's stepping motor, just like the Aurora 85mm f1.4 I tested earlier this year. Unlike that lens, however, this one seems to be quite a bit slower in its actuation. In AFS, it's confident and gets to where it needs to be most of the time, but I feel like I'm always just waiting for it to do its job. For comparison's sake, here is the fastest lens I know at this focal length, the XF 33mm f1.4 with its linear motor. As you can see, the difference is night and day between these two lenses. I also tested this side by side with the Meiki 33mm and the Viltrox 35mm Air, and even the old XF 35mm f1.4R. The Sirui, unfortunately, is slower than all of them in the end, and this is a bit unfortunate, and I hope that they can work on this because the Aurora 85mm was absolutely excellent. In terms of accuracy, it's mostly been good, but from time to time I have seen an image or two out of focus, but this is nothing out of the ordinary for a Fujifilm camera. Sirui seem to have improved their interaction with the Fujifilm autofocus system for this release, which is really great to see. When it comes to AFC and tracking, I've found it to be mostly good once it locks on. It does struggle a little bit at closer focus distances and starts to lose subjects that are moving quickly, like a cyclist, as they get a little bit closer to the lens. I made use of focus priority during my testing so that the camera would only release the shutter once it was sure that it had focus. And this also doesn't capture anywhere near as many images as the other lenses that I've tested in similar situations, including the Meiki and Fujifilm lenses, all of which track a little bit better than this one. The center of the frame is very good with this lens when used wide open. I'd say it's a hair sharper than the XF 33mm and a hair softer than the Meiki 33mm, and that puts it firmly into the I would use it on a client shoot territory for me. As we stop the lens down, it improves slightly up until f2.8, and then you'd really need to shoot test charts to see any difference after that. In terms of detail rendered, it's an excellent performer in the center of the frame. Out in the far corners, it also does a good job and, to my eye, is on par with the XF 33mm f1.4, which is one of the best on the system at this focal length. The corners continue to improve all the way up to f8, where they reach their sharpest point. This level of performance is excellent for anyone who wants to keep sharpness all the way across the frame. As you can see here, there's quite a bit of longitudinal chromatic aberration. This shows up around high contrast out of focused edges in day-to-day shooting, and also around the specular highlights in bokeh. It's not horrendous, but it's noticeable in everyday images, much like the XF 33mm. Wide open, we see a little coma towards the corners of the images, but it's completely gone by f2. Now, as we'd expect from a full-frame lens design, there's very little vignette to be seen with this lens. I'd say it's less than half a stop, so not really even worth testing for. Here's how it looks when corrected in one of my sample images. It's basically a soft wash towards the center of the image, and it's barely noticeable until you compare it after correction. The bokeh that came from the Aurora 85mm was one of my favorite features of that lens, and when I received the 35mm, that was the first thing I wanted to play with. This lens too does an excellent job of rendering natural scenes and keeps things smooth and somewhat moody, for want of a better word. I really like it for scenes like this. When we begin to test the bokeh on specular highlights, we see that the 13 aperture blades keep the bokeh round. As we expect from a full-frame lens design on a small sensor, it's also not showing a lot of cat's eye. As we stop the lens down, the bokeh shape does not really change a whole lot, which means you'll get consistently good-looking bokeh even if you stop the lens down. However, there is a little bit of an onion ring pattern to be seen and quite a bit of chromatic aberration. If that bothers you at all, it might be a consideration. For me, I find it to be perfectly fine, and I love the way it renders the scenes that I photograph most. So stick around for the In the Field and Slideshow sections to see a lot more samples of the bokeh. As we saw with the 85mm lens, flare and ghosting are definitely present in this lens design, and most of the time the coatings do a really good job of suppressing them, but when the angle hits just right, you'll see some immediate changes. Now, as you can see here, slight angle changes produce very different effects. Personally, I like the rainbow effects and the concentric circles of contrast change, but I still haven't managed to find the perfect subject and composition to make use of them in the field. In the end though, they're easy enough to avoid by slightly changing your angle if they're not for you. You can produce some large, sharp sunstars with this lens, especially as you stop it down. Of course, you'll get a little flare and ghosting with those when using a bright light like the sun and having it on just the right angle, but if you can get your angle right, a large and defined sunstar is possible if that's what you like in your images. Hopefully you've seen by now that this is technically quite a good lens, but what's it actually like to work with in the field? Now, to answer this question, I decided to take this as my only lens on a day out around Seoul with my good friend Andy. He flew in from Japan for a quick editorial assignment, and I decided to tag along and explore the city with him and just shoot a few frames along the way. What I found was that this lens is every bit as reliable as my workhorse, the XF 33mm f1.4. It focused accurately, if a little slower than I might like, and produced nice, sharp images. The images did tend to feel a little bit cooler than my XF lens, but that's something you can deal with in post. Having the physical aperture ring is great, as it's the way that I like to work, and it frees up my front dial for other functions, which is great when you're working fast. While it is a bit heavier than the XF lens, I was only carrying a single lens, so it wasn't really an issue for me. With a few more lenses in the bag, I may have felt the difference, but not the way that I was working on that day. It didn't have that front-heavy feeling that you get from massive lenses like the Viltrox 27mm f1.2. On that day, we shot everything from random street scenes to food at the restaurants on Andy's shot list and all the other bits and pieces along the way. Out of 500 or so images, I noticed a handful that were out of focus, but really not enough to worry about, and even in the dark bar that we worked in at the end of the day, it held up really well. Honestly, this is a really good lens that I'd be happy to use for an editorial shoot like this. I had no complaints at all over the course of the day. However, I was left with one last question that I want to answer in the conclusion section of this review, and that is, what does this lens bring to the table that the smaller and lighter APS-C lenses do not? So, as we've seen, the Sirui Aurora 35mm f1.4 is a very good lens. It's well built, it's weather sealed, and has a physical aperture ring. It's very sharp from corner to corner and has very little vignetting. The bokeh is smooth and non-distracting, but it does contain a little chromatic aberration. Autofocus is very accurate, but a little slower than I would like. So overall, it's a technically very good lens, and I've had no issues working with it at all. However, when it comes to the APS-C Fujifilm X system, we are blessed with so many different options for a lens at this focal length. Now, I personally use the XF33mm f1.4 as my workhorse, and I have the XF35mm f1.4 as my day-to-day lens. I've also been fortunate enough to be provided for this channel with the Meiki, Viltrox, and TT Artisan's offerings for review, and I still have them for comparison here. So what I would like to do here is just rapid fire the strengths of each of these lenses. The Meiki 33mm is much lighter, cheaper, and noticeably sharper. The Viltrox Air is just tiny and light, but it is significantly softer than this lens. The TT Artisan's 35mm strengths are interesting flare, and it's really budget price point. The XF35mm f1.4 is for the purists. No technical measure is better than the Sirui, but it just has the feels. Now, the XF33mm is basically a workhorse. It has all the best technology in a smaller and lighter package. Now, the Sirui comes in above all the other third-party lenses in terms of cost, but it is cheaper than both of the Fujifilm lenses. It's the largest and heaviest of any lens in this category, and it does everything well, but doesn't seem to have a party trick to really make it stand out. So if you're looking at the XF33mm f1.4 but can't stomach the price, this might be a good option for you. But considering the market today, I really do struggle to recommend this over other third-party offerings, which is a little bit sad because it's a very capable lens with all the bells and whistles. But what do you guys think? Have I missed the mark here completely, or is there some magic in this lens or a use case that I might not have considered? Do let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for joining me here, and I hope that this review has been useful, and even if this lens isn't for you, I hope the slideshow will be. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.